Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you today. How's everybody doing?
Great.
That's good. Baruch Hashem. How are you, Mel?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. Amy, you're doing good?
Yes, and I'm really enjoying the Monday night class with your wife.
Oh, good. They look
Very, very, very good. So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm joining you from California now, so it's 9 a.m.
Where in California?
I'm in Fresno, the Central Valley.
I love Fresno.
Anytime.
You live there?
I'm here to the year. I live here to the year.
Very nice. I've been to Fresno a handful of times. Do you go to the Zirkins there?
Yes. We were just with the Zirkins for Lag BaOmer, you know. We were having such a great time there. Yes.
That's very nice. I want you to know I've spent many times there because my father is very close with the Zirkins.
Ah, okay. Yes, we like going there very, very much. So next time you're in Fresno, if you're here, you must stop over at our house.
Of course, will do. And maybe visit the Lay's potato chips factory there.
Which factory?
Lay's potato chips, is that in Fresno?
No, but you know, we do have the home of raisins, Sun-Made Raisins.
Okay, that's it.
That's where you want to go, to Sun-Made Raisins, all those chocolate-covered raisins. I don't know, actually, I don't know what their rating on there is, so never mind that, just thank you, good to be here.
All righty. Good to see you. And nice to see you, Bonnie, Janet, Dr. Yashar, Jillian. It's good to see everyone today. We're going to start this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Behar-Bechukotai. It's a double Torah portion, and we actually finished the book of Leviticus. We finished the book. This Shabbat will announce Chazak, V'nis Chazek as we conclude the Torah portion. It is, it's also the Shabbat Mevarchim, the Shabbos that blesses the new month of Sivan, which means that we have the holiday of Shavuos just around the corner. 12 days away to be precise. And it's of course a double Torah portion where we're going to be learning two Torah portions. So I think maybe today we'll have a 2-hour class, if that's okay with everyone. No, I'm kidding, we won't have a 2-hour class. It's a double Torah portion, and it's a very interesting Torah portion with a lot of details in it, and that is the Torah portion in a nutshell. So Parshat Behar starts in chapter 25 of the Torah, verse 1. The Torah tells us, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor, that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, the name of the Torah portion is Bahar, which means a mountain. It's interesting that we're reading this just a couple weeks before Shavuos, that we know Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, is the mountain that we received the Torah. And it's interesting to point out the name Behar on a mountain. There's a lot of teachings that we learned from what is this idea of a mountain, Behar, and why is Har Sinai, Mount Sinai? There's a lot of beautiful teachings of, we know the story, the famous story. Why was the Torah given on Mount Sinai specifically? Anybody remember why Mount Sinai? The Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Why not Mount Everest? Or maybe in my hometown of Marin County. Marin County is beautiful. I mean, we have some great mountains over there. I remember climbing them my whole childhood. I even flipped down one of the mountains when I was younger. Why was it given on Mount Sinai?
Because it was the smallest mountain.
That's right, Bonnie. That is correct. Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, was the most humble of all the mountains. There's a famous children's song that goes that all the mountains were arguing, they were fighting. The strongest mountain said the Torah should be given on me because I am as strong as can be. You see, the song continues, but from all the mountains Hashem chose Sinai because he was not. It goes on explaining that Mount Sinai was humble. Mount Sinai didn't speak of its greatness and how big it was, but it was humble. But the question is, if you want to, so therefore the Torah was given on Mount Sinai to teach us humility. But of course, the question is, if you want to teach humility, give it in a valley, right? Give it in Fresno. Give it in a place where it's a valley where there's no mountains. Give it in a place that's a mountain represents haughtiness on the other hand. So why is it Mount Sinai? It seems like two contradicting ideas. And there's a beautiful explanation, which is really powerful to every single Jew, that the lesson is that at the same time that we have to be humble, we also have to be a mountain. Sometimes people, it says Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest leader of all the Jewish people, Moses, was the most ish anav me'od. He was the most humble man. And the question is, how was he the most humble person if he was a person that was the greatest leader? But the answer is it's not a contradiction. You're able to be very humble even if you're great. Moses would go around saying, he says, fine, I'm the leader. But he says, if you should know that if Mel Trepper was the lead, appointed as Moshe Rabbeinu, he would have done an even greater job than I. He would say anybody that was given my kaiches, my abilities, my talents would have been even greater than I am. Hashem gave me certain talents, so I achieved my job. He remained humble throughout his entire service as leader. And the same thing Mount Sinai teaches us, just because you're a mountain, it doesn't mean that you aren't humble. You have to remember that you're in a great position. You have to have a good self-esteem, a healthy self-esteem. You have to be proud of who you are, but don't forget where everything comes from, right? Sometimes people, what's the title? I'm a self-made millionaire. I'm a self-made billionaire. A million these days is nothing. I'm a self-made billionaire. And people are very self-made. But we have to remember, no, you're a Hashem-made billionaire. God helped you, and God gave you the blessings. God gave you the talents. And always remain humble with what Hashem has given you. And this is the message of Mount Sinai. And this is why the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. A Jew has to have what's called Gaon Yanko, Jewish pride. You have to be proud like a mountain, standing strong. If someone comes along and tries to put you down as a Jew, you have to stand strong. Don't listen to them. Be a mountain. Be proud. And at the same time, remain humble and don't be arrogant. By the way, there's so much about mountains, especially as Shavuos is coming up. Now, also the idea of Mount Sinai is that life is a journey to climb the mountain. The Torah was given on Mount Sinai, and these laws were taught on Mount Sinai to teach us that we all have to grow to achieve as much as we can, and we all have our mountain that we have to climb. The mountains that we need to climb are the Mount Sinai's in our life. The mountains, it says Moses climbed the mountain to give us the Torah. We want to reach the Torah, we have to climb our mountain. We want to reach this holy state. We want to reach perfection. We want to reach the level that Moses attained. We have to climb our mountain. What does it mean to climb our mountain? So if you climb a mountain, it gets a little challenging. It gets difficult. It's hard to climb a mountain, especially as you get higher and higher. And that's the same idea with our own personal growth, that climbing the mountain means that you're going out of your comfort zone. You're going where it's a little challenging, wherever it's a little bit hard, you climb your mountain. And that's the name of the Torah portion, Bahar, on the mountain. Climb that mountain, climb that journey, even when it's a little challenging. And for everyone, the journey is something else. It could be a small little challenge or a little thing that is hard for you. I know where mine are. And we all have to find where ours are. What's a little difficult for me? That is my personal mountain that I need to climb and that I need to grow. There was an amazing story. A story from the TV show The Waltons. How does it go? I don't know. Yeah, Amy?
Yeah, I was going to type it. I didn't want to interrupt, but I always remember the story that Grandpa Walton tells John Boy, that when you come to a mountain, you have two choices. You can go around the mountain, which is much easier, or you can climb the mountain. But if you go around the mountain, you miss the view from the top.
Wow, that's a very good one. I like that. Thank you. You got to always make sure to climb that mountain, right? See the view from the top. It's always worth it when you get up to the top. By the way, I remember as growing up in Marin County, that was definitely one of our favorite things to do on Shabbos afternoon. Right behind our house, we had mountains. In front of our house, we were surrounded. We live in San Rafael, in Lucas Valley, is where, if you're familiar with the area. And in Lucas Valley, we have all the mountain hike trails, like literally behind our house, around the block, are all the trails to climb the mountains. And all day, every Shabbat, we would just climb those mountains. And it was the view, it was just spectacular. And it was hard. It was difficult at points, but we always would climb these mountains and had a wonderful experience doing that. And we got to see the beautiful view. But climbing our mountains spiritually means finding that challenge for you and reaching a very high level. A story that I love is that there was a story about a Chabad rabbi in Chicago who owned a Chabad shlich in Chicago who would give many Torah classes, and an individual would come to his classes for many, many years, but he would just come to the classes. And one day the Chabad rabbi goes over to this individual and he says, you've been coming to these Torah classes. He says, but Torah and Judaism is not just about attending a class. It's about bringing it to your practical life, climbing the mountain, going on the journey of life. He says, it's about time. I'm going to ask you, I know it may be uncomfortable. It's time to take on a mitzvah, something that's not going to be easy. But a mitzvah that is meaningful to you. And he says, okay, I'll take on a mitzvah. I'll do kosher. I've been thinking about it for a while, and thank you for coming over to me. And I will start keeping kosher. And it's not an easy one, but I'm going to do it. And the rabbi says, great, amazing. I'm going to come over tomorrow. I'll come over tonight, and I'll come kosher your house, and you'll start keeping kosher, and that's wonderful. I'll go through the laws. And he says, no, don't come tonight. Come tomorrow. I'll start keeping kosher tomorrow. And right away, as a rabbi, when you hear someone saying tomorrow, and okay, tomorrow. Why is he saying tomorrow? He's never going to do it. He says, come on, I'll come tonight. I'll teach you. We'll go through the laws. I'll separate the kitchen. I'll kosher everything. I'll bring my blowtorch. We'll make the oven kosher. I'll tell you what you need to buy. We'll do it tonight. He says, no, Rabbi. Tomorrow you're going to come. Tomorrow you'll kosher it. Tomorrow you're going to teach me about this. I'm starting to keep kosher tomorrow. The rabbi says, okay, I'm not going to push it. Fine, no problem. In the meantime, this member, he goes, and he gets into his car, and he needs to make an important journey somewhere. Where is that? To a restaurant in Chicago that he absolutely loves called Super Dogs. Super Dogs in Chicago is an excellent, fabulous, delicious, amazing restaurant that people love. Not kosher, of course. And it was a very famous restaurant. I believe it still is. Actually, I said this story once, and someone from Chicago told me it's actually owned by Jews. It's a Jewish owner of this restaurant. But he goes to this restaurant. He says, if I'm keeping kosher, I need to have my last Super Dog. And he gets in line and he orders his last Super Dog. And he sits down at the table, and he's not just eating the Super Dog. He is enjoying every last bite. The flavors are dancing on his palate as he's sitting there and eating it. And a man actually watches and notices the way he's eating it. And he's amazed. And he says, excuse me, can I sit down next to you? And he says, sure, sits in. And he's eating that Super Dog. And the man is watching him. The guy sat down next to him. He says, with all due respect, I've seen many people eat Super Dogs, but I've never seen someone eat a Super Dog the way, with the amount of love and excitement as you're eating this hot dog. Can I ask you why? What's going on? He says, sure. And the man's like, oh, if I tell him I'm going to start keeping kosher, and then he's going to say, what's kosher? I'm going to have to explain it to him. So he didn't want to tell him because he's starting to keep kosher. So he tells the guy next to him, he says, the reason why I'm eating it like this is because my wife and I are going on a budget. And we're going on a budget, and one of the things that we're cutting out from our expenses is Super Dog. So this is my last Super Dog I'm eating. I'm a regular over here. The man sitting next to him says, wow, well, today's your lucky day, because I am one of the owners of Super Dog. And he tells him, I have what's called a gold pass, a gold card. And he pulls out from his wallet a gold card. He says, my close family and friends have these gold cards, and you never need to pay for a Super Dog again. So I'm so happy I saw you eating this, and I'm sitting right next to you. Here's your gold card. Now, this man, his name was Charlie, by the way. His name is Charlie. This man, Charlie, he is so mad. He's going crazy. He says, "What kind of joke, Hashem? What kind of joke are you playing on me over here? You're giving me this gold card when I just committed to start keeping kosher." He gets right back in the car and he speeds over to the rabbi who was still at the synagogue where he finished the class. He says, "This is pathetic. I quit. I give up. I'm not doing it." The rabbi says, "Calm down. What happened?" He says, "Remember I told you tomorrow?" He says, "Well, the reason why I told you tomorrow I'm going to keep kosher is because I had to have one more super dog." And he tells him what happened. While I'm there, the owner gives me a gold pass to have unlimited dogs for the rest of my life. And now I told him I'm keeping kosher. He says, I quit. I'm not doing it. Why in the world would God do this to me? Why would he give me such a challenge and a test to give me this gold card? And the rabbi said, I hear your story. He says, the reason why Hashem is giving you this gold card is to tell you, Charlie, you think that you're just keeping kosher and it's going to be hard for you. He wants to give you this gold card to show you that this is a mountain that's going to be challenging, but that you could climb, and nothing could ever stop you from climbing this mountain as long as you keep your mind to it. And that's why Hashem did that, to give you this gold card, to remind you to always keep strong, never give up, and you have more strength to climb that mountain more than you ever thought. This man became religious. He lives in Chicago. He has many Shabbat dinners where many people come to his home, and behind his chair in his kosher home, he has a massive picture frame with this gold card hanging inside with a quote on the bottom that said, "This card is to remind you that Hashem wants to tell you that you have more strength than you could ever imagine, than you could climb any mountain that comes your way." And this is Behar on a mountain. This is the message of the Torah portion this week, that we have to all climb our mountain. And that's why the whole Torah portion is named this. Although then the Torah does start talking about agriculture, but then the Torah portion this week goes on to a whole nother topic and discussion, and it starts with all the different laws of the Shemitah cycle of the year. And I just want to point out that this coming Rosh Hashanah, we begin a Shemitah year. What is the Shemitah year? So the Torah tells us in verse 3, 6 years you should work and plant in your field. But on Shana Hashvi'it, on the 7th year, it should be a sabbatical to God, right? We all know the English word sabbatical. People take sabbaticals. The idea of a sabbatical is to help you grow, to reset. In a way, if you look at this year, a lot of people had a a moment, not sabbatical, but a time to reset. Sabbaticals are to, stop, pause, and refocus. There's a story that Rabbi Tversky of blessed memory, I believe. No, sorry, not Rabbi Tversky. That it's written by Steve Covey, I believe it is. And he says about a story about a person walking in the forest and he sees two people sawing a tree, and he continues his walk and he watches as they were sawing, and then he comes back 2 hours later and he sees the people are still sawing down a tree. And they said, "Why are you still sawing it? I saw you 3 hours ago sawing down this tree." And they said, "Because the saw is very dull." She says, "So why don't you go and replace the saw?" They said, "Oh, for that, there's absolutely no time." But of course, in life, we have to remember, if you have an opportunity and you're able to go and strengthen your saw, and things will happen a lot better. And this is the idea of the sabbatical in English, of course, and with all of us. So of course, now I think this past year, we've all had that time to refocus, even though it was a very challenging year, but to say what is important in life, what do I really need to focus on? This is similar to a sabbatical. But next year is actually a sabbatical year, which is a Shemitah year. And the Torah goes through all the laws, that it's a year that is completely designated to God, and you have to leave your fields, that you cannot touch them, you don't work them at all, your animals don't work, and it's a very special year. Apparently in Israel, this is still it's still practice where you let your fields free, and they have different stamps on the fruit and thing that this is a Shemitah. If it was for Shemitah, if it's not for Shemitah, and there's many laws of the Shemitah year, your loans are forgiven, and there's and slaves have an opportunity to go free, and it's a year that is completely designated to Hashem. completely designated to God. It's similar to the 6 days of the week. You work, and on the seventh day you rest. Over here also, for 6 years you work the field, and on the seventh year it's a year of rest. There's great miracles that happen, that God would give extra food from the crop of the 6th year, 3 years extra for the next 3 years to be able to live off of. And the reason why it's 3 years, because from the time that they would start planting and receive the extra crop, it was a long time because they didn't touch it or work it at all. And any poor person and anybody could go and eat from these fields that were open. And this is the mitzvah of Shemitah. Practically for us, Shemitah, the only thing in America that would be different, first of all, if you get fruit from Israel, you have to be cautious that it was properly, they did the laws of Shemitah properly on it. That's number one. Number two, every single year we have, before Rosh Hashanah, a special prayer called Hatarat Nidareem. And it's actually fascinating, because Hatarat Nidareem is, you go through a whole prayer, you sit in front of 3 other people or 10 other people, like a little Jewish court, and you basically say everything that I have sworn or said falsely, or things that I didn't mean to say, it should all basically be forgiven. That way we don't have any vows that we made, right? If a person says, I swear to ... right, that I'm going to do this and this and this. Or you're talking to somebody, having a conversation, you promise someone something and you don't fulfill it, it's a problem. So therefore, Hatarat Nidareem is you're breaking all the vows that you made. By the way, in Jewish law, every time we want to tell someone something, you say Bli Neder. So if someone says, will you send me that email by tonight? Instead of saying, yes, I will send it, because now you're making not an oath, but you're giving you a word. You say, Bli Neder, without an oath, I'm telling you I'm going to do it. And this is the way that we speak as Jews, to not make oath. But this year, when we make this prayer, we'll say Hareini Muzmal. We make a Muzmal, which is basically a declaration that any loans that I gave should not be forgiven, basically, during the Shemitah year. Because what would happen if I loaned you money and you didn't pay me back yet? Shemitah year annuls it. Now came along, which is a beautiful thing, came along Hillel, and he said, now what's going to happen? People aren't going to give loans before Shemitah. If I know that I'm going to ask, someone asked me for a $10,000 loan, and it's right before the Shemitah year, I know in 4 months it's going to be forgiven. So this guy's going to make some nice money. He won't have to pay me back. So people stopped giving loans. So he made a special roundabout way that if you did have in order to keep encourage Jews to loan money to each other, and they set this up. It's just interesting to point out. Practically, this Shemitah still plays a somewhat of a role and a role today in how we make this prayer. Then after the Shemitah year comes what's called the Jubilee Year, the Yovel Year. The Yovel Year is after counting 7 years, 7 cycles of 7 years, 7 times. So now you have you're 49 years in. The 50th year should be a Yovel Year. And they would blow the shofar, and everyone would know that it's the Yovel Year. And they would do this on Yom Kippur, and everybody knew that they were entering into the Jubilee Year. And listen to the proclamation. Let me know if it sounds familiar. The court should sanctify the entire period of the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land for all the Hebrew slaves who live on it. It'll be called the Jubilee Year for you. Where's that from? The Torah. Where else is that written? This is a quote written, I saw it myself, on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. They should proclaim freedom for all those who live on it. What does this mean? It's referring to the slaves. No matter what a person did, if a person was poor and he had to sell himself as an Eved Ivri, as a Jewish slave, or even, by the way, we'll discuss later, even if you sold to a non-Jew as a slave and you were a slave, on the Jubilee Year, you are free. Which is really a beautiful concept, because it gives this person almost like a second chance at life. That if this is, by the way, talking about someone who decides that he wants to continue his slavery, we learned a few weeks ago that he would pierce his ear and make an announcement that he wants to continue being a slave. But on the Jubilee Year, he was free. Another thing that happens is all the land, all sales of land go back to its original owner. Why? Because in Israel, every tribe had their special land. So therefore, when it came to the Jubilee year, it returned to its owner, which is also a very nice idea. That way it stays in the tribes. People sometimes have to sell land because they're running out of money or whatever it was. But your tribe always had like a second shot. It's interesting because when it comes to the sale of land, they didn't sell it based on its value for the next 1,000 years or 200 years. Right? Today you buy a home, okay. In the next 100 years, this might go up, it might go down. It's going to be very valuable. I'll definitely get my money's worth. When you would buy a field or a piece of land in Israel, you would say, how much produce can this land give me over the next 20 years until it's going to be a Jubilee, or the next 40 years, whenever the next Yovel was. And based on that profit margin is how much you would pay. You're paying for the produce that it would give you and the convenience of living in that land, but not for a long term, which is very different than purchases that we make today. And these are some of the laws of the Yovel. And once again, you don't work your fields and the like. The Torah then goes on to tell us about the laws of interest, which is a very, very interesting set of laws. It says that a Jew lends money to another person, you're not allowed to take interest. Why? The Torah tells us because it's your brother. It's your brother who you're giving money to. It says that when your brother is going to come and he's going to ask you for money, you should give him money and not charge him interest. It's very interesting, but when it comes to making money, we all know that money makes you money, right? Interest, that's how you make money. In society today, in business today, in the world today, money makes you money. Everybody knows if you have money, you're able to, you put it into bank, you get interest. That's how you make money with the money that you have by loaning it. So how come you can't do this? Normal society tells you money will give you money. And the answer is because it's your brother. When it comes to your brother and they ask you for a loan, you don't charge interest. And it's, because on the other hand, technically you're allowed to go to Bank of America and get an interest on however much money you put in. You're allowed to get interest if it's not directly from a Jew in need. And it's not because, this one, it's because the Jewish people were brothers and sisters. And when a brother asks for a loan, you give them a loan. It's the highest form of tzedakah is giving someone a loan. Because when you give someone a loan, you give them their dignity. When you give someone tzedakah and you go over to them and you say, here's your tzedakah, how much do you need? Okay, I'm going to give you this money. Here's some food. So it's very hard. But when it's a clear case that this person needs tzedakah. But when you say, by the way, here's a loan for a tzedakah, and I want you to know that whenever you get a chance to pay me back, no problem. So now the person could get back on his feet. He could get himself a job. He has his a little bit of covet. He has a little bit of respect, which is very important to make sure that people feel respected. So the highest form of tzedakah is giving tzedakah as a loan to someone. We at the synagogue we did a beautiful program right at the beginning of the pandemic where someone stepped up and said, let's start a gemach. In most Jewish places, there's something called a gemach. Gemach stands for gemilas chasadim, kindness. What is a gemach? A gemach is an amazing thing. I'll tell you what I saw in Muncie in 1 second. But a gemach is where you have a free loan society of different things. So either money is one, it's a free loan society, where you take out a loan, but then you have to return it. Another something in a gemach would be wedding dress gemachs is very popular. Kalas and brides are getting married. Maybe they can't afford a wedding dress. They go to the gemach, they borrow it, and they go back. They give it back. So I was in Muncie, New York, and Janet, I don't know if you're still there, you could hear. I'm sure you have something like this in Lakewood. There was a list on the back of a magazine about the amount of gemachs of these to loan items to people. And I think there was over 200 things that were on this list. I was laughing about it. Oh, Janet, I asked, do you guys have gemachs in Lakewood with anything under the sun? I was talking about in Muncie, they have a gemach for almost everything. You want strollers?
We have a gemach for school supplies, for weddings, for parties. If you name it, we have a gemach in Lakewood.
It's amazing. So that's it. You know, and it's like Mikam Israel, who's like the Jewish nation. They set these up everywhere. We went with our kids. It was a big. We're having my wife's. We're in Muncie for Shabbos. My wife's aunt was getting married. She's younger than us, and the whole family, everyone was coming together, and everyone. It's a family. We rented a mansion in Muncie. We had about over 150 people coming for Shabbos together, and you need a pack-in place and this and that. We went to this gemach. Yeah, that's you wrote it right, Amy. And we went to the gemach, and you need car seats, strollers, you need extra pack-in plays, cribs, mattresses, beds, chairs, table, and it has on the back of it what kind of gemach, and it's unbelievable. But this is the mitzvah of making sure to help someone without giving interest. There's very interesting laws that come out to play with this. Just 2 weeks ago, we had the Maimonides Leadership Program over here. And every Sunday, we have teenagers that come to learn Torah for 2.5 hours. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. We're wrapping up almost, I think, the 15th year of this program, and it's incredible. But because we're half virtual and half in person, half the people come on Zoom, half the people come in person. For those that come in person, to make the extra effort, I put out breakfast. So some of our teachers come from Boca. So I asked them to pick up bagels from the kosher bagel store. And they bring bagels, and they say, text me the receipt. So he texted me the other day, one of the teachers, he texted me the receipt, and it was $48.81. So I had to pay him back. I sent him on an app, or like a Cash App. You just send money over an app, and it goes directly to the bank. I sent him $50. And he came over to me like very disturbed and upset. He says, it was 48. You can't pay me extra. Ribbis, you want to charge me? You want to give me interest? So I said, no. You have to go out of your way about 1.5 miles. I'm paying for the gas. And he's like, okay, fine. You know, you're paying. But the laws of ribbis, of interest, you're not allowed to pay someone. Actually, you're not allowed to. In fact, in Jewish law, it says you have to be careful about, you can't go to someone and be like, return the item or the money with a bottle of wine. That's called interest. Because then the person's gaining gets taken away from the mitzvah. So you have to give it to them with no extra gain. By the way, one of the interesting laws, we're not going to get into the full detail, but I'll just tell you the general thing. Right away you imagine, hold on a second, what about banks in Israel? What about Jewish businessmen? How do they get away with charging interest, right? All the banks in Israel. And they made a very interesting, the rabbis have the power to find out ways that the Torah allows us to do different things and live special ways. Some people call it loopholes. I don't like to call it loopholes. It's not a loophole. It's a way that Hashem says that I set up ways that you could still serve me and, still make a profit. It's not a, God forbid, a loophole. It's a way of serving Hashem and finding another contract. Only a rabbi that knows a lot is able to work these things out. In the Talmud and the Mishnah, anytime someone gives a leniency is because they're a great rabbi, a Rav I'm talking about. A Rav is someone who really answers hard, deep questions that he has to look up. But they came up with something called the Hector Iska, which is a business leniency that we're not getting into the laws, A, because I don't know them in depth, and B, it would take a long time. But in very short, the way I understand it is that if a bank is giving you, for example, a startup business, you loan someone money in the business to return the money in with interest and the like. So the way that the contract is writing is that they're not taking interest, God forbid, on the money that they gave you, but rather on the profits of the business itself. and they want a percentage of the profits of the business versus equaling to X amount of dollars, which would, be the same amount as the interest, but it's through the income. So they're buying a partnership into the actual business through getting a profit from that. And now there's very interesting laws. What happens if the business goes down, if the business doesn't make it, if it doesn't excel? I believe that's where there's another contract on top, that if the person fails of another way, that's where it gets very in great length and very deep halachas and laws about. But this is the laws which we learn from right over here about the prohibition against taking interest. Then comes the laws of Jewish slaves that are owned by Jews, an Eved Ivri. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says that if you walk into a home and you see that the home has a Baal Habayit, the owner of the house, and it has a slave, and you walk in and you see, okay, so just to jump back to the loan thing, then we'll get back to what Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory said. So the same idea when it comes to the shtar, they have a contract. So when you're buying a house and they're giving you a loan with interest on it, they have this contract that you're signing that's called a Hector Iska, which has some kind of leniency that they need to sign, that the money is coming from the comfort of, meaning the extra money from the comfort of the home that they're living in. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know the exact way that it works, but there is a whole contract that is signed that permits the banks to do and give these loans. I don't know 100%. I know the general thing is that you're not giving the exact return on the money. It has to be a return on something else, and it's through a contract that you're signing alongside it. But it's good. It's good to look up. I have to look it up. I remember learning it once, but I don't remember everything I learned, and that's why we always have to learn more and more. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, so he said that if you walk into a home and you see that one person's sleeping on a bed and one person's sleeping on a floor, one person is the owner of the house and one person is a slave, which one is which? Normally, you think the person sleeping on the bed obviously is the owner of the house, and the slave is sleeping on the floor. When it comes to the laws of an Eved Ivri, of a Jew owning a slave, the way the slave needs to be treated, there's so many rules. And right over here, the Torah portion goes through all the rules of a slave. So how does it start? If a person becomes needy, that he has to be sold to you as a slave, you're not allowed to make him do work that is not nice. That is demeaning. And he needs to be treated like an employee or like a hired resident. The Torah tells us he has to work on the Jubilee. He's free. He goes with his children. He goes back to his family. He doesn't have to be a slave anymore. It tells us about the way he needs to be treated. You have to give him whatever you get for yourself, you have to give him as well. And you have to really treat him respectfully and nicely. One of the ideas, of course, you're not allowed to tell him, okay, I want hot water. And then if you don't need the hot water, that's a big problem. You're not allowed to tell him, and now make it cold. You can only tell him things that are useful and necessary. The food that you eat, he must eat. He has to eat first if there's only one portion of food. If there's only one bed, he gets the bed. The slave, the Eved Ivri, is treated very well. By the way, these were the first sections of laws that we learned after the Jewish people were freed from Egypt, to remind us to treat the slave well, because we were also once slave. And this is about both Jewish slaves and non-Jewish slaves. They need to be treated perfectly with great respect. And of course, one of the idea when the Jewish people were in Egypt, it says that they gave them avodat perach, which means labor that had no means to end, that had no purpose. So they'd build the houses on like quicksand, and it would just cave in. And there was no purpose to what they were doing. There was a story about a Jew in the gulags in Russia, in a labor camp in the prison over there for 15 years. And every single day he would pull a string that was inside of his where he was, and behind the wall, he knew that he's pulling this heavy string, this rope all day, and there was many things that he would use and imagine what was behind, because this is the labor that he was told to do. And he would always imagine now there's a great mill, and he's the amount of wheat that he's making and how many people he's feeding. And this would keep him going for the 15 years. One day, they tell him, you're free to go. And the first thing that he does is he wants to see what's behind the wall. And he goes to see and look behind the wall, and he sees it's absolutely nothing. There was nothing that he was pulling, and the man completely fainted. He faints. And later they woke him up, and they said, what happened? And he said, the whole 15 years I was here, all I was imagining is the greatness of what I was accomplishing. But now that I see nothing was there, it was avodat perach, it was a meaningless work. That became a big problem. It was very challenging for him. And therefore, of course, we have to remember, make sure, don't give someone meaningless work. Always give them the, if it's a servant, he needs to make sure to give him the good work, things that he feels purposeful with. Then the Torah goes on about a Jewish slave that are owned. Laws of Jewish slaves that are owned by non-Jews. So if, let's say, a resident, a non-Jewish person owns a Jewish slave, and the Jew becomes needy, the Torah then tells us, it is a very long chapter. We're still in the same chapter 25, and it goes till 26. It has 55 verses. And the Torah then, the chapter continues that he should be redeemed right away. But if he's sold to a non-Jewish person or to an idol worshiper, as soon as he's sold, he should be redeemed, and one of his fellow Jews should redeem him. Now, here's something very interesting. The Torah tells us that his uncle or his cousin should redeem him, or any other close relative from his family should redeem him, or if his own hand will acquire wealth, if he gets money somehow, he should redeem himself. Of course, because you don't want him to become an idol worshiper like the person that he's working for. And the Torah actually tells us afterwards about this idea that if you work for a non-Jewish person, you're not allowed to. The Torah right afterwards is going to end off this Torah portion of Behar, telling us not to serve idols and the like. And it says, because a person might think, if I'm a slave, I'm able to do what he's doing and serve these idols. But it says that he should be purchased back, and you should calculate how much money in order to buy him back, that he shouldn't be a slave by a non-Jewish, by an idol worshiper. I heard a beautiful explanation over here of why the Torah says that it should be redeemed by a person in the town. His uncle, his cousin should redeem him, or another close relative. I heard an explanation that says everything that the Torah teaches us is applicable today. And everything that we learn in the Torah is something, everything that we learn in the Torah is something that has a message to us today and how we live our lives. So there's a beautiful message of what does it mean that it should be an uncle or a close relative. Why doesn't it say, what about a father? It doesn't mention father. Seemingly that should be the first one that you should mention, a father. Fine, I understand why it doesn't mention a mother or a daughter, because generally the Torah has a view that the mother and the daughters and the children are being supported by the father as well. So it says an uncle or a cousin. So comes along, we'll get to the questions right at the end. So I see a lot of questions are coming in. So comes along the Torah portion and tells us about the uncle and the cousin. What about the father? Why doesn't it say anything? So I heard a beautiful explanation that says, what does it mean that a person falls into slavery? It's a very applicable message for today. It means it's talking about a person, God forbid, he's enslaved. He becomes enslaved. What does it mean by a non-Jew? He's enslaved by something that's not a Jewish thing. What does it mean enslaved? Practically today, we're enslaved to many things, right? We could be enslaved to our cell phones. We could be enslaved to addictions, right? There's many addictions out there, and we become enslaved. And God forbid, what happens when a person becomes enslaved? What happens? A person becomes addicted, right? Let's say you have a person who becomes very addicted. He becomes a slave. He's a slave to whatever his addiction is. And an addict in any kind of form, in any field, what could happen is he needs to be redeemed. But how is he redeemed? So the Torah tells us someone should redeem him. And then it says his uncle, his cousin should redeem him, or another close relative from his family should redeem him. And then it says that he should redeem himself. That's how it ends. Why does it say that? So the Torah is telling us that when it comes to a person who is enslaved to any addiction or any challenges, the way to get out is through realizing the problem yourself. And first, you have to try, your family will try, and people around you will try, but someone who's really addicted needs to remember that it's going to be through themselves. And that's why the first step of the 12 steps is to realize that you're powerless in connection to yourself. And once you realize this, then you're able to go on this journey to redeem yourself. And this is with all addictions. And one of the other messages, I mean, it's a little bit painful and hard to say, but it says that's why it says his uncle or his cousin should redeem him. Why doesn't it say father? So it says that when a person has an emotional and a father, not just physically, but an emotional presence of a father, meaning in their life they have this father, whether it's godliness, Torah, emotional father, they have everything that they need in front of them in a healthy way. So then they don't fall into this enslavement because they're enslaved to something else. They're enslaved to Torah and mitzvahs, or they're enslaved. You know, it's not saying that I'm not, God forbid, not saying that any addict, okay, they don't have a father. I'm talking about someone emotionally there to support them, like this idea of a father. And this is the practical, message today from this little one-liner over here that the Torah could kind of hint to us that number one, if a person has a problem, he needs to do it himself. And number two, the reason why it omits the father is because we all need to make sure to have that father presence, or if we're the father, be that present father, or be present over there to be able to help and guide all those around us. It's a metaphor. It's not necessarily in this scenario, in the way that I'm explaining it. It means that we need to be there for those that we see, to say, how could I guide them, or how could I guide myself to be on the right path and not be enslaved to anything around me. So that's one of the interesting messages when you bring it to today's message and today's learning and things that we go through. The Torah then ends off with a Jew is not allowed to be in the idol business. You're not allowed to make engraven images. There's a lot of very interesting halachas of laws of different antique kind of stores or things that a person's in. If they're selling avodah zarah, if they're selling things that are idol worshippers or worship, there's a big problem over there. A Jew's not supposed to be in such a business. And the Torah ends off Parshat Behar and tells us that you shouldn't, that when laying they shouldn't kneel on the ground on stone, which is actually practiced until today. On Yom Kippur, we know that there's many parts of the prayers that we actually bow down to the ground. So if you're in a tiled room, you'll notice that people put something under their knees, not to bow down to the tiles. As Jews, we don't go directly onto tiles to bow down, like the last end of the verses in the Torah tells us not to bow down to the stone on the ground. We go straight into Parshat Behar-Bechukotai. Bechukotai is the last parsha in the book of Leviticus, and I'll just we'll go through it somewhat quickly, but it starts off what will happen if we follow the mitzvahs of God, and this is chapter 26. It says if we follow God's mitzvahs and guard what God tells us to do, he's going to give us geshmeichem. What is geshmeichem? He's going to give us rain in the proper time, and our land is going to grow, and we're going to have all sorts of blessings. Geshmeichem, also rain, it comes from the Hebrew word gashmiut, physicality. When we follow Hashem spiritually, he makes sure to take care of us physically. And it goes through many different blessings. It actually goes through 10 different blessings, which is similar to the 10 blessings of the blessings of Isaac to Jacob that he gave in the Vayitin Lecha, which is one of the prayers that we say after Shabbat. There's a special prayer of blessings that we mention. But then the Torah in chapter 26, verse 14, and this is if you're in synagogue, you'll notice that whoever's reading the Torah, he goes into an undertone and he reads quickly and quietly. The Torah tells us what's the consequence of failing to observe the mitzvot, and the Torah tells us very horrific and hard and terrible atrocities and tragedies that will befall the Jewish people if we don't follow the Torah mitzvot. There's a very interesting idea over here that sometimes A person wants to read through this quickly, and you say, why do you have to put this into the Torah? Why does it go through all these rules and the ifs and nots? And the answer is no, you have to have it loud and clear, right? When it comes to education and you're raising your child and he's playing with matches, you don't just tell him, oh, sweetie, those matches aren't good. You tell him, stay away from those. You get passionate, you shout, you say it, you make it clear. This is going to hurt you. Put it away. Why? Because you don't want him to get hurt. Or when it comes to crossing the street or something that's dangerous, because you care about the safety of the individual. And therefore you'll scream, you'll get passionate, you'll get loud. And this is actually what takes place in the Torah. God mentions what's called the klalot, the curses, if we don't listen to God. And it goes through the very, very, very harsh and sad things that unfortunately the Jewish people have gone through many times. But right at the end of all the curses is something actually very beautiful. And that is, God concludes, after literally going through a lot of curses, God says, "V'zacharti lahem brit rishonim." I'm going to remember the covenant I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Meaning, even though, yes, there might be times in the Jewish life and Jewish history that we go through the curses, we go through the struggles, at the end of the day, Hashem will always remember us. And will always stand together. And will always be redeemed. And will always come out stronger. Even though, yes, unfortunately, many times, we've had to go through very dark times, very painful times. Not, God forbid, saying that they're punishments that we went through. That we can't say that. We're not God. We don't understand the ways of Hashem. But yes, we've been through dark times. But at the end of the day, Hashem says, I always remember my promise that I made. There's an incredible story that Rabbi Grossman in Eretz Yisrael in Israel one day is visited by a man from Israel that's involved in politics, working in Germany and many places in the world. And he comes to Rabbi Grossman. He says, I have to tell you and give you something with the most amazing story. And he goes and he tells him, I was in Germany meeting with people, and I met with someone who told me and gave me an artifact. He said that his father never spoke about the Holocaust and his involvements being an SS officer. He denied it and hid it from his family. He said, my father was on his deathbed a few weeks ago, and he called me over. And he said, I have something to tell you. He says, I did the worst things that a person could ever do. And he said, but there's one thing that I have that I need you to do me a favor. And he pulls out an envelope showing him that he was involved. And he said, whatever you could do in life, try to make up. And obviously there's no way that you could make up, but remember and be kind to the Jewish people. And he pulls out an envelope with a wallet. And he says, you see this wallet? He says, one day we were destroying and burning a synagogue in Germany, and the Torah scrolls were on the floor, and I just became a young officer, and I needed a wallet for my new card, my new badge ID that he was showing his son. He said, so I saw the Torah on the floor, so I took out my knife, and it was very good parchment, perfect for a little wallet, and I cut out a piece in order to make a wallet for my ID. And he pulls out this wallet where you see it's a piece of parchment, and he gives it to his son. He says, please go give this to someone in Israel. Give it to a rabbi to know what to do with it. And this man is telling this ambassador in Germany, my father shortly later died, and I'm talking to you, and you're going back to Israel. Please give this to a rabbi in Israel. And he gives it to Rabbi Grossman in Israel. And Rabbi Grossman is trembling as he's looking at it, and he starts to read the words. And he sees that it's the words of the Tochach of the curses that's going to befall the Jewish peoples where he cut out. But then he sees in the clearest print, that was all rubbed out, but in very clear print on the wall it was written, Ve'atem nitzavim hayom kolchem, and you will all stand together today. And these are the words right after the Tochacha in Parshat Kitavo, later in the Torah. And it's the same message over here, that yes, there's going to be hardships that the Jews have to go through. But Atem Nitzavim Hayom, we're all going to stand strong together. And like in this week's Torah portion, I'm going to remember my covenant. And even though we go through hardships and tragedies in life, and you look at this past week, for example, and the Jewish people went through a huge tragedy. 45 souls taken And it was for me personally, it was a very painful Friday. I remember waking up Friday. It was very painful. You feel very in shock. And I remember saying, today I'm going to make sure to put on 45 tefillin with 45 Jews. And in our Lag BaOmer party, not only did we do 45, we put on tefillin with over 100 people that day to remember the 45 people that didn't put on tefillin that day that wanted to. And our response to these dark times and troubling times is to do more mitzvot, to do more positive things. And the stories that are coming out now from these Shiva houses are really this message that we will stand together on this day. I just read a story this morning. There's a picture of a man who you see his clothes are torn because he's sitting Shiva in a wheelchair, visiting another man sitting Shiva. And it says that this was a school teacher who brought his 13-year-old son to Meron. Now, there was another student in his class who won a raffle for a free trip to Meron. And he was the top student in the class that won this raffle because he was learning very well. And the father said, do you mind when you go with your son, can you take my son also to Meron? And he said, sure. And this father with his son and his friend and his son's friend and classmate were all in Meron together. And he said when the bleacher fell, they started to run to leave Meron. And the two boys, he says, that's when the stampede happened. The two boys did not make it. His son and the other son. He was badly hurt and was brought to the hospital, and that's why he was in a wheelchair. He was sitting Shiva for his son, and he said he needs to go pay a Shiva call to this other man's son. I'm reading this, and you see a picture of it. And you would think there would be a lot of upset over there. And you see the way that they're hugging each other and the conversation that went on, there's videos of it, is that they're talking with each other how they could make a Torah and what they could do in honor of their children. They're coming and they're standing together out of such dark and hard times that we go through. We have to remember, V'atem nitzavim hayom and v'zacharti lehem brit. We stand together. We have to stand together. And we have to remember the covenant that God has promised us. And we know that Hashem will always remember us. And this is the message of after the Torah tells us all about the bad things that are going to happen. Nevertheless, Hashem is always going to remember us. And that's the Torah portion concludes. And we say chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek, as we conclude with all the tithes and the tzedakah and the animals and the meiser that was dedicated to the temple. And with this, we finish the book of Leviticus. And that is the Torah portion and the double Torah portion in short. And that's a little bit about it. We have some questions in the chat box. And by the way, anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to put it in the chat box or unmute yourself. And just to get to the questions, is interest allowed to be charged to a non-Jew? So Jillian, I mentioned earlier that interest is allowed to be charged, but I want to reiterate the message behind it. And that is that money in the world, we all know that money makes you money, right? You put money in a bank and you make money off of that money. That's called interest. Everyone has that idea of what the point and the power of money is. And that's the regular way of life, that through money you make money. But the Torah tells us that when your brother comes to ask you, right? A person has a sibling that comes to ask you for money and they need to borrow money, you give them money. You don't charge them interest. And the Torah says the Jewish people are all brothers and sisters, and therefore as Jews you are not allowed to give money to a Jew, but when it comes to a non-Jew, you're allowed to make money off of that money. When it comes to the banks and the apartment and the houses and the rents, if you rent your apartment, if a person buys an apartment house and rents out the apartment, is that the same as collecting interest on his money? That is not collecting interest, and that is not tzedakah. That would be business. So I don't think so, Mel. Meaning in that kind of scenario, it's not interest that you're charging him. You're allowed to make money. You don't have to lose money off of you can't rent to a Jew. But when you're giving physical money to a poor person, by the way, I think that's also where it plays a role. I'm part of it. I have to look into it. Now I have homework to find out more about this Hector Iska, about this business loan. But the general idea is you're talking about people in Israel banks making money. The mitzvah over here is when your brother asks you for money, he's not trying to ask you for a loan because, he needs to put food on the table or get a job or get back on his feet or buy some transportation or clothing for his kids. We're talking, that's a loan, that's tzedakah. When you're talking about the banks, they're giving you $100,000 loan because you're going into some kind of investment or you're buying a big house. So Baruch Hashem, it's still a loan, but it might be different, and I'm sure that's why the business thing applies. I don't think that anyone would say that you could give a poor person a loan with this business loan, Hector Iska. You can't do that. It's just speaking about with the banks in order that they could continue business. Our rabbis found a way to really continue in such a way. I believe that is the way it is. Amy, that's beautiful. A new Netflix. Anybody that's watching a Netflix. Hashoter Hatov, the good cop. Very good. All right, so that's a little bit about it. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and
Good. Thank
sei
you.
gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Of course, good to see you.